Good morning, good afternoon. It's great to have you all here today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's webinar. Our webinar today is called Trade Legacy for Legendary, Migrating from F5 to NetScaler. We're joined today by Richard Faulkner, Solutions Architect at Farouk Systems, Michael Schuster, CEO at Farouk Systems, Todd Shu, President at Farouk Systems, and myself. Hi, everybody. My name is Amber, and I look after the marketing here at Farouk. Richard has been a fervent supporter of end-user computing for over 2 decades, primarily working on the reseller side, which enabled him to adapt new technologies early. Currently a solutions architect at Farouk Systems in Chattanooga, Tennessee, he thrives on sharing his knowledge about technology and assisting IT staff in optimizing digital workspaces for employees. Originally from New York City, Rich has lived across the U.S. and served as a nuclear engineer in the U.S. Navy on submarines before transitioning to an IT career. Michael Schuster is a CEO of Farouk Systems and a highly recognized Citrix architect. Michael has sat on Citrix's consulting team for more than a decade and led many of Citrix's most significant consulting engagements. He regularly contributes to Citrix's leading practices and documentation. And Todd Shu, the president of Farouk Systems. His previous consulting company, TH Consulting, was acquired by Citrix in 2012, at which point he became the director of Citrix Consulting Services Canada. Todd joined Farouk in 2020, and today Farouk is a platinum partner with Citrix. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for joining us.
So there's no better time for customers to adopt and expand this industry-leading application delivery controller platform for their web app acceleration and optimization needs. NetScaler is more than an appliance in front of Citrix environments. That is but a footnote in its roster of industry-proven features. With recent changes to Citrix's licensing, customers can access unlimited NetScaler instances as part of their subscription. As numerous F5 appliances near obsolescence and the upgrade path appears costly, there lies a strategic decision point for customers to enhance their Citrix investment, supplement outdated load balancing infrastructure, and substantially curtail both operational and capital expenses, all while transitioning to NetScaler's cutting-edge features. In today's webinar, we're going to specifically focus on moving from F5 to NetScaler. We'll keep the techiness to a minimum. We'll start by recapping NetScaler's place in the market, why transitioning to NetScaler would make sense for many customers, including some key terminology differences, how to orchestrate a successful migration, and we'll close with a few case studies. If you have some questions along the way, please feel free to add them to the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to hand things over to Michael and Richard.
All right, thanks so much, Amber. So I just want to get some nice announcements out of the way from the Citrix BU of Cloud Software Group. Recent license changes for Citrix attached NetScaler customers are going to have some pretty beneficial capabilities for them. That drive compelling value proposition, unlocking significant access to NetScaler licenses capacity, not just for Citrix, but for the entire enterprise. The new Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud license provides a NetScaler premium entitlement of unlimited instances and up to 1 terabyte of bandwidth to allocate across them. The platform license offers unlimited, period, plus access to the intelligent traffic manager capability that NetScaler has as well in the portfolio. Hardware appliances are still available, obviously, as we talk about the NetScaler instances as the virtual types, but the hardware is available still, and that's actually being offered at lower cost for customers that do need to have more horsepower on lock, and those are offered with a lifetime RMA now. And I'll say that again, there's a lifetime RMA for the hardware if it's through the active its support cycle. And NetScaler is providing free consulting services in partnership with us for F5 to NetScaler migration. So you get access to the F5 and to NetScaler experts here at Farouk to help adopt NetScaler and lower your TCO across your technology portfolio. There's compelling reasons right now, obviously, to why it's worth taking a serious look at NetScaler and considering transitioning or expanding the use of NetScaler in your environment to realize that lower TCO while gaining access to superior performance and ease of manageability. And I'm going to head over to Richard now to cover some of the highlights as to NetScaler's true reputation in the field.
Thank you, Michael. Since Citrix purchased NetScaler in 2005, it has become an integral component in some of the largest data centers. Most people do not realize that if they browse the web for any time, their traffic has gone through a NetScaler. The two largest cloud providers use NetScalers. The largest online e-commerce retailers, most major financial institutions, and stock exchanges count on the NetScaler for their reliability and security. The two largest smartphone networks have deployed them to manage the application traffic. In fact, 90% of the Fortune 500 use NetScalers. Back to you, Michael.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so again, NetScalers literally run the internet, guys. So let's chat a little bit about some of the challenges that customers typically face when dealing with F5s that we've heard from customers. Changes in enterprise technologies is never a walk in the park. Decisions to change are generally premeditated and driven by rational business drivers, not just because something's shiny and new. We've heard from various customers in the past on their challenges with F5 in particular that pushed them to look at other options. And the top four were, first and foremost, pressure to reduce IT budget, consolidate vendors, streamline technology investments, technical issues with the product in one way or another, be they management, reliability, or limitations, continually falling behind on feature innovation. We've heard that a lot. And they need to adopt a more flexible and versatile hybrid cloud ADC platform that can be centrally managed with the same code, which is frankly a problem with F5. And the need for better observability on their appliances and the applications hosted on them. Next, support. We've heard from a number of customers about their difficulties getting qualified consultants to assist with their implementations, even from F5, creating project delays, impacting business objectives. We had one customer on the West Coast who waited so long to get some resourcing that they eventually had to take it in-house, figure out the F5s on their own. By the time they eventually were able to get them deployed, the lifespan of the hardware was already half over. Not exactly great. Support in general is also a key factor to technology, period. Poor support or access to it can torpedo even the best product and leave a bad impression. But in this case, what we've heard is the scarcity and capability or services or managed service providers, not just professional services, and that has been a clear decision point in some instances. The admin experience is worth mentioning too, and I just want to pick briefly on the double-edged sort of iRules on F5, which is one of their hallmark capabilities, which allow complex manipulation of traffic going through the appliances. In my opinion, F5's iRules, although very powerful, are a bit of a dark art, and they're largely community supported. iRules, albeit extensible and highly versatile, can be, again, a bit challenging to program. For NetScaler, the functions that iRules will often do are broken up into various defined features, and then there's an expression engine that's well documented that's used to actually get the NetScaler to do whatever you want to the traffic. This simplifies creating workflows and functional logic for your applications. Lastly, the rising TCO of F5s from hardware refreshes and price increases to overall supportability in general. With the new hardware platforms coming out from F5, there is some bills to be paid by customers that are renewing and refreshing. So it is timely for us to be having this webinar, and customers are thinking about these things as they have in the past when such refreshes come up. Rich, tell us about what customers are seeking from our experiences in the field.
Well, what we're seeing, thank you, Michael. What we're seeing is the NetScaler features and capabilities have continued to set it apart from the competition. Capabilities like hosting virtual appliances on a dedicated physical appliance were pioneered by NetScaler and then copied by F5. They were the first to offer cloud-native capabilities. F5 had to purchase Nginx in order to gain that capability. Their competitors like HA Proxy and Nginx have yet to separate their data plane from the management plane. As a result, when an application pod is deployed with them, a new control plane is deployed every single time. If you're running 1,000 pods, you have 1,000 different places to log into to make changes or track firmware levels, update certificates, etc. With NetScaler, the common control plane lets you view all 1,000 pods in one dashboard, vastly reducing that management overhead. This is further enabled because the NetScaler products use a standard code on their products, whether they're running cloud native as a virtual appliance, installed as software on bare metal Linux server, or native NetScaler hardware. F5 has 5 different management packages for each of these different deployment ideas. The commonality increases the supportability and makes the NetScaler future-proof because the flexibility of deployments and management. The architecture of the NetScalers ensures that the hardware runs faster and easier, lowering the cost of running NetScalers. Not to mention the new licensing options that Michael mentioned at the beginning that Citrix has announced that drive the expense even lower. As future capabilities arise, NetScaler adopts them in all form factors without requiring additional hardware or new code, a management console, or even a new name. With NetScaler, you get the power of one. First is the one-pass architecture. That means that NetScaler opens a packet one time and takes action on the wire as it passes through. Other technologies like F5 and even the native functions that you'll find with the cloud providers have to send the packet over to the certificate engine, then over to the authentication, then back to the firewall. You get the idea. The NetScaler logically processes the packet as it's in flight, processing through the machine, resulting in much better performance and lower latency. In fact, every time tests are run, the NetScaler is at least twice as fast as an F5. One code base allows all form factors, whether physical, virtual, on the cloud provider, cloud native, all to be configured with the same commands. This reduces the complexity of the environment and the knowledge required by your team to operate the NetScalers. And finally, the one management plane that we spoke of earlier. From NetScaler Service Console, you can view and act on all of your devices, regardless of their form factor. If a certificate expires, for example, you can go to one place to see which appliances have the certificate, and you can even create a job there to replace a certificate from that console. This is what results from separating the management plane from the data plane. By switching to NetScaler, you'll benefit from the NetScaler's greater value and much lower total cost of ownership. With the F5 solutions, you have 6 different management solutions, 3 different code bases, depending on whether you're running hardware, virtualized, in the cloud, or as a cloud-native app. With NetScaler, you can deploy the solutions how and where you want to, without worrying about who can run it in that form. The configurations are all done the same way with the same commands. Additionally, the licenses are flexible across the platforms. F5 hardware licenses cannot be used on virtual appliances or vice versa, and the cloud-native Nginx has its own licensing. With NetScaler, you can flex from virtual to container to hardware to cloud, all with the same license. The analytics on the NetScaler, or that NetScaler has available, are second to none. The new console service, which used to be called Application Delivery Manager, available in the cloud or on premises, provides the central management plane to view all of your deployed resources. The cloud-based console service includes traffic management, as Michael mentioned earlier, and that capability is now available, providing next-level traffic routing and monitoring. Think global site load balancing on steroids. You can see if someone in Cincinnati is using Cox cable and what their latency would be to your applications. This enables you to decide on increasing or replacing resources based on metrics, not an educated guess. This also enables the traffic to be routed around outages, whether they're host-based or network-based. Last year, if you all recall, Azure experienced an outage. The NetScaler Traffic Management noticed the outage and rerouted traffic 3 minutes before Azure noticed the outage. This enabled a large social media company whose infrastructure is hosted on Azure to avoid the outage completely. NetScaler's N-factor authentication is unmatched in the industry. It uses different variables to determine what kind of logging capabilities you can use based on multiple factors. NetScaler even allows you to enable N-factor authentication requirements in front of applications that don't have any form of authentication. And NetScaler can perform functions for SAML or OAuth, permitting single sign-on for any supported application. So back to Michael to talk about the functions.
Awesome. Thank you. So we won't spend too much time on the slide, but feel free to grab a screenshot if you wish. The lack of familiarity of a new platform can be a blocker to change, so we wanted to provide a quick reference list of common terms between the two platforms. F5 and NetScaler fundamentally do most of the same things, but are named slightly differently in many cases as to their features and components, or are located in different areas of their respective interfaces. A pool of servers, for example, in F5 is a service group or a service on NetScaler. A self-IP floating IPs in F5 are subnet IPs or SNPs, if you will, on the NetScaler, which are used for SNADing, load balancing, where the client speaks to one IP and then the appliance speaks to the backend servers off the other IP, which is the SNP. Inline mode on F5 is use source IP on the NetScaler, and the backend servers are typically pointing to the appliance for its default gateway, albeit this is now much less common than SNAT due to application advancements in preserving client IP addresses for apps that get load balanced. Of note, the iRules function of F5, as I mentioned previously, is handled by specific features on the NetScaler. While iRules are very flexible, they can also be a bit daunting, as I mentioned, and NetScaler simplifies this with structured features and then expansive expression language to use to manipulate and control what you would like the NetScaler to do with that traffic, which makes it a lot more approachable. All right, I also want to talk a little bit about the different platforms that are available for NetScaler. So it's available in many form factors to suit a broad range of needs, from SMBs, front-ending and load applications and load balancing them, to ISPs and telcos, load balancing and controlling terabits of traffic a second. So I'll use the same code base and the same management tools as Richard has mentioned before. Starting with the VPX, it's a virtual appliance available for most public clouds and on-prem hypervisors. It can even be automated for deployment and work in nice DevOps use cases. Its flexibility allows it to scale from megabits to tens of gigabits of bandwidth based on CPU license and RAM allocations. The CPX is similar to the VPX, but it's designed for cloud-native containerized application use cases, which have just been popping up everywhere over the last half decade. The physical MPX, as we start getting into the hardware platforms. The MPX in of itself is a single tenant platform, albeit it can be subdivided with admin partitions to provide some partial isolation, equipped with powerful compute and SSL offload cards. And the BLX variant allows the NetScaler code to be deployed atop Linux hardware, taking advantage of bare metal offerings from public cloud providers. So it's a great option for customers that need a bit more capability than perhaps what the VPX might offer in certain use cases. Get access to hardware acceleration capabilities through that BLX platform. And last but not least is the SDX, which provides full isolation and multi-tenant support and runs multiple independent VPX instances, which also benefit from the SSL hardware acceleration found in the SDX hardware platform. All right, Richard, let's talk a bit about migration hurdles, because again, change has many blockers.
Yeah, change is inevitable, right? Except from a vending machine. So what are some of the common challenges from migrating from F5 to NetScaler? While the common code base in NetScaler does make it easier to work with, you'll still need some NetScaler technical expertise to move the workloads. There will be migration costs, and the more work you've done, the more it's going to cost. Your team will need to be trained on the new configuration and be ready to make changes when necessary. Migrating some of your workloads could be more challenging than others. You will need to ensure your data is protected and that you have a good process in mind on how to get you from where you are to where you want to be. And when the IP addresses need to switch, there will probably be at least some momentary downtime.
Let's just talk a bit about migration planning first and foremost. And none of the thing we're going to talk about over the next couple of slides is really going to be rocket science. It's really common sense in most cases for anyone that spent a reasonable amount of time in IT. But we just want to go through them as a quick refresher, if you will. So we're going to talk about migration planning here, and really, although migration planning logic applies to pretty much generally provide most applications or technologies that might get replatformed, the difference tends to always be in the nuances, but again, largely common sense. From experience, knowing full well what you're getting into is crucial. So commencing with discovery, we can ascertain the various features of the F5, the VIPs that are responsible and aligned to different app owners, the network integration and the existing network architecture, dependencies of the F5 appliance and other services, be it authentication servers, syslog, SNMP, TACACS, you name it, and the backend dependencies on the ADC. Like, does the ADC own a subnet, i.e. is it the gateway for the subnet, and it's pretty much the ingress and egress of that given subnet, which is a bit of an older architecture, but is still fairly common on super large scale load balancing infrastructures. Is the gateway to the app servers that it's load balancing used in any of the use cases. That comes back to that inline mode that we talked about before. Once data has been gathered, conducting a rationalization exercise on the VIPs is also important. Oftentimes we find abandoned VIPs or configurations that have no need to be migrated and would waste precious time in doing so. Rationalizing down the services on the appliances reduces overall workload and provides an opportunity to clean up. Otherwise, it's garbage in, garbage out. With this data, we can move on to design. It is obviously another key component. With data gathered from discovery, rationalization, dictating the list of VIPs that we need, the capabilities that we need to in fact have and move, an appliance design can be defined to guide the network integration, prerequisites, and suitable configurations necessary to operate. Cutover planning tends to be the most critical next to discovery. While it's ideal for to efficiently do a lights off, lights on migration, in many cases of replatforming, it comes with inherent risks, and not all apps may be able to withstand an extended migration window outage. This may necessitate per VIP or batching groups of VIPs for migration in waves as scenarios to manage risk and reduce downtime. In many cases, downtime can be reduced by disabling ARP and ICMP on the source VIP and the VIP itself on the NetScaler brought online, while simultaneously enabling it on the destination on the NetScaler. And you can generally script that and reduce downtime to maybe a couple of lost milliseconds of latency. Identifying how the apps will be tested on cutover is also critical. Effort involved from app owners needs to be understood and what test cases they have, and that can vary from use case to use case. We dealt in situations where there was pretty much no validation to be done. We could validate that the VIP was up and online ourselves. In other cases, there was, depending on the application, there was extensive test cases that the app owners had to run through just due to the criticality and complexity of the app. The more these types of things can be sorted out, the better. Anyways, it is a big task, requires a fair bit of TLC, but with the right planning in place and foresight, it can be done efficiently and be quite streamlined as well. Then we move on to migration execution. A lot more no-brainer steps here. Deployment, so deploying the NetScalers and integrating them to the network, monitoring and logging tools, hardening the appliances, functionality testing. Then we've got staging. Staging the backend servers comes next to ensure that the monitoring communication paths on the firewall, i.e. like working through the firewall or whatnot, are open, and it's prudent, as it isn't uncommon for critical apps to have temporary VIPs required for pre-cutover testing. So what I'm saying here is, depending on the criticality of the VIP, it may not be sufficient to just test the IP on cutover and maybe and just validate that the backend servers are up with your L7 monitors or whatnot on the NetScaler. It may also be important prior to actually have temporary VIPs that might necessitate firewall rules to be opened or whatnot for the app owners to do their testing before they sign off and actually cut over and reuse the same IPs. Last but not least, there on staging is also being concerned ourselves with SSL cert transitions and whatnot, and ensuring that we've got access to the private keys, we can move those over. We sorted any gotchas. We have had instances where the folks that had created those certs are long gone. There was no documentation on the private keys and they had to be regenerated, but knowing these things in advance so they can be duly staged can help save time and avoid issues. Then establishing an effective communication plan with stakeholders, including app owners and potentially users, may be necessary depending on how impactful the changes may be. And load balancing VIP cutover may be easy and seamless and no one may notice. However, a switch from the F5 APM module to a Citrix Gateway or AAA server on the NetScaler will warrant a little bit more TLC because there's going to be a change for the user in the experience that they're seeing firsthand. Cutting over and testing, it's going to be involved working with the app owners, setting schedules, changes, change control, CAB, orchestrating the cutover as per plans, and obviously defining backup plans as well. And last but not least is decom. So by this stage, everything should be have gone well. Any kinks have been worked out. The appliances are now fully exited on the F5 side, and a hypercare period is typically going to be employed to ensure that the old appliances remain online for a reasonable period of time. Maybe it's 2 to 4 weeks to ensure that if there is any absolute worst case issues, there is a fallback plan. But generally, by this point, if things have been cut over and working, could just work through those issues live. in an ideal scenario. But anyways, keeping them around for 2 to 4 weeks online is wise before doing a cool down period, which might take another couple of weeks to do, depending on the organization's standards, before formally decommissioning the appliances, including data destruction, any and all data, be they SD cards, factory resets, destroying the hard drives used in the devices as well. We've certainly seen instances of hardware that was given back to lease liquidation companies, only to find that they got rid of the hard drives, but the SD cards were still in place with all the customer data on there. So don't let those things leave the data center without those hard drives or SD cards, whatever the case may be, being destroyed. And I just want to close out here to cover a little bit on some case studies. So we've handpicked a number of specific case studies here, but there's a lot more that we probably could have gone into. And the first one is one dealing with an F5 takeout related to a large national healthcare provider in the United States, a significant user base of over 110,000 users. They've since gotten much larger. They had what they considered an unreliable fleet of 18 F5 devices that were nearing end of life or due for support renewal. They were spanning 5 data centers, and they also had a number of legacy Microsoft TMG servers as well. And we worked with that particular provider, and healthcare is no walk in the park. It's that we're dealing with any changes you make have significant impacts. We're dealing with real critical pieces of infrastructure here that outages cause significant impact. So there was a lot of TLC involved here to not just standardize on the NetScalers, but transition those services, of which there was in excess of 2,500 services, virtual servers, and what have you, across the enterprise. And what they gained from that is not only lower total cost of ownership and avoided the additional refreshes and support costs by standardizing on the one vendor. They had SDXs in this case, so it was actually quite easy just to move these F5s onto the NetScaler on the SDX platform, provide them isolated instances from anything else. But it also allowed them to gain application visibility through analytics, improve supportability and stability, and they saved millions on support renewal refreshes as a result of that. And up next is just a bit of a more standard use case as far as transitioning from F5 to Citrix for F5 to NetScaler for front-ending Citrix environments. So in this case, it was one of Canada's larger financial institutions in the credit union space, 24,000 users. F5 had been used for years due to some questionable decisions at more of a management level back in the day, was used to load balance Citrix and do secure ICA proxy for the users. And frankly, these folks had suffered from poor user experience and a poorly configured architecture for about a decade at this point. And they had no insight into session performance that gave useful data to figure out where they could actually identify pinpoint scenarios for improvement, or to start focusing on if users were having performance issues coming through those devices. Citrix doesn't support anyone else decrypting and re-encrypting the ICA protocol anyways, so supportability was always a challenge, and if there was performance issues, it was a constant finger pointing between the two vendors about whose responsibility it was to fix. So the pain became too much. They eventually did a refresh and did the investment into several dozen NetScalers to displace those F5s, which allowed us to define a much more appropriate architecture for the requirements. The requirements hadn't really changed. The requirements had always been there, but they just couldn't be delivered prior. So they invested in NetScaler for these Citrix services and transitioned their Citrix services over. There was a dramatic improvement in user experience and performance of the user sessions. Availability was dramatically improved as well, and they also, of course, gained critical Citrix session analytics through that process. So again, that's just a couple of case studies. We've got a number more. So if you're interested in other types of migrations that we've done in the past from F5 to NetScaler, we can certainly give you some more information about that. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation here, Citrix is investing in us and with customers who are interested in taking advantage of these new capabilities in their licensing to start expanding their use of NetScalers in their environment and migrate off F5 and expand their NetScaler footprint. There is the ability for us to perform many of those services free of cost to you to assist with that migration, including iRules conversion, which can be daunting for a lot of people, to assist and make that process as painless as possible and allow you to realize value of your investments much faster. All right, hand it back to Amber. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. That was a lot of great information. There is a handful of questions, so I think I'm going to hand things over to Todd and let him take it away.
Sure. Hey, so we got a few questions. Number one, what is the best network routing practice in NetScaler MPS VPX, right, for an environment with multiple backend and fronted subnets, right, using PBR or MPR route traffic correctly and prevent asymmetric routing? I think that's
off the top of your head,
yeah,
otherwise
that's like an age-old question, right? Like I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people ask this question about, whether that we, whether in a way, like whether to actually use the NetScaler as a router, right?
Yeah. So the NetScaler actually does a great job with the routing. It also has the capability of adding ACL or authorized on there as well, so that you can control which parts on which part of the network can go to. You can also, because of policy-based routing, you can enable the ability for one team to manage the rules for one section or one subnet, and another team to manage the rules for another subnet, and let the NetScaler handle all the traffic in between those locations. Again, and plus you'll be able to bring all of the capabilities of the NetScaler to bear, whether it's optimization or compression or whichever, on any of the traffic that it passes through it. So our recommendation is always to put everything through you can possibly through the NetScaler. Let it see it, because the more it sees, the better it's able to optimize that traffic.
Yeah, although the one caveat to that is again, I mean, if you really don't need, if you don't have an application dependency on, let's say, the inline mode that we talked about, the use source IP, you're better off using the snap mode if possible, largely because you don't necessarily need everything that's happening with that backend server to be going through the NetScaler and consuming bandwidth. I mean, because again, it's there's patches, there's other things that are unrelated to its load balancing and its application delivery functionality that backend server is doing that would otherwise be forcing all that traffic through the NetScaler because it's its default gateway. But that's just a small nitpicky point. I mean, some customers will enable MAC-based forwarding, but I find, frankly, and I get flogged for this now and then by other network architects for saying this, but I find enabling MBF to be sort of the lazy approach to just trying to fix an issue by just taking the routing table issues on the NetScaler out of the question, out of the equation or whatnot. MBF has its own limitations, especially at scale, although incidentally it is recommended to have when we're deploying in public cloud. So if you're putting a VPX in Azure or AWS, often it's enabled by default and it's recommended to be enabled, although you can work without it. But generally, MBF as a crutch and a cop-out just to sort of solve routing issues is not something we recommend doing, generally speaking. So the broader question is, if you've got NetScalers that are fronting that many networks or whatnot, or back-ending that many networks, some architectural questions would come to mind, like, are they all of the same security zone, right? Because if you've got a NetScaler that's got legs in a bunch of different security zones, maybe it might be more appropriate to have multiple NetScalers and just sort of isolate that a bit more. In some instances, you can have a NetScaler that's directly plugged into a bunch of backend subnets, and that's great. It's just L2 at that point. You're not trying to route through firewalls or routers to reduce a couple of milliseconds of latency here and there. In some instances, it may be easier if the applications don't have that much load or are not that sensitive, that you could just not have as many subnets plugged into the NetScaler and just have some traffic be routing to your backend servers to simplify your configuration. But again, PBRs, especially when it comes to asymmetric routing in certain cases, are certainly a great tool. I think they're not used often enough to solve customer challenges, to be frank. And I think that might come down to the fact that PBRs in the general networking world are kind of considered, I was mentioning MBF being a bit of a cop-out crutch sometimes. I've seen that mentioned in standard network discussions as well, because generally if you start throwing that on Cisco switches or whatnot, there's more processing power now getting used to deal with that. It's a bit of a different story on the NetScaler, because whether you're doing a PBR or not, it's the same load in the appliance. It comes back to the one-pass architecture. It doesn't matter whether it's doing a PBR or it's applying WAF or whatever to it. It's the same impact to the traffic. So it really is not going to sap more processing power or add more latency by turning that on. So hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, happy to take this offline and go into further detail on that as well.
Cool. All right, so the next question, well, how do you actually size it compared to like a big IP appliance that how do I know what kind of hardware specs that I would have to size it compared like between NetScaler and the big IP?
So in our experience, it's required less hardware on the NetScaler and then to handle the same workload as a F5 big IP. But we would base it on some statistics that we can gather from the appliance as the throughput that's coming through, how many transactions per second, what kind of policies are being run on it, and then we would be able to size those up to make sure that the replacement NetScaler met your requirements.
The SSL TLS ciphers and private key size is also a factor.
Correct.
A couple of things there as well. For certain use cases, it might require a slightly different architecture. Like if we're deploying, let's say a NetScaler environment to front Citrix as an example, HDX proxy, for thousands upon thousands of users, we largely go recommend if we're using VPXs, we'd go recommend what we call a multi-tier architecture, where there's a tier at the front that might do the authentication if you're doing authentication up in the cloud as well, and then a back-end tier of individual standalone NetScaler VPXs in your size environment to handle roughly, give or take, 1,500 concurrent users to 1,000 concurrent users, and that's not only just to better manage blast radius, but also just to overcome some limitations in the cloud platforms themselves. So it provides a bit more of a comfort, but we prefer to see customers do that versus just try and create giant, big honking appliances. And one of the other benefits there too is that it provides you some flexibility to scale up or scale down capacity based on load and demand versus just constantly having ginormous instances that are quite costly running all the time.
And of course, now with the new licensing, crunch all you want, we'll make more, right? Run as many VPXs as you want to. So
that's right. That's right. All right. So another one there. I think that's also another common the common challenges here that we have a lot of. Somebody here asked. We have a lot of pushback from technical people who are F5 trained and doesn't want to go to a new platform. How do we get these people on board and so they don't feel threatened? And they can learn another platform.
Yeah, hey, listen, that's an age-old challenge. I mean, we had the same thing with with people who wanted to use different hypervisors and want to stick to one versus another. I find within the business context, the decision maker often just comes down to being finances and risk management. When it comes down to finances, listen, I mean, look at the case of what's going on with Broadcom and VMware right now. There's a lot more people that have been ardent supporters of, listen, we don't want to use another platform. We're sticking with VMware. It's what we know. It works. It's that's fine. And that has worked for a while. But now with changes that are coming up that are going to have more financial impacts, that narrative is changing just a bit because it's now becoming a bit more painful to be using that same logic. And it's the same logic here. When there's an opportunity for customers to potentially drastically lower their IT costs, that starts to, and provided it's providing the same flexibility, you're not losing any significant functionality, you're not introducing risk, that tends to provide opportunity to start exploring that a bit more. We've had cases where we were working with a customer to introduce NetScaler into their environment when they were a purely F5 shop, and the decision making actually did not come from the network engineers. It actually eventually came from the senior directors who pretty much said, for what these things are doing, it's a more appropriate platform that actually manages our risk better. We were going to have to spend money to expand our use cases anyways for this given platform that we were working and consulting on. It just makes sense to go with the vendor, the appropriate vendor to do that with. And it was a choice from the management level to get on board and do that and they looked at it not from a cost perspective. In this particular case, it was a risk management perspective. So certainly, if folks are used to F5, I mean, hey, listen, I'm used to driving a certain type of car. I'm going to be hard pressed to go drive a completely different car potentially because I'm not familiar with that car and maybe it works completely different or whatnot. Maybe a bad example, but you get the idea. Like generally speaking, there has to be, I think, greater management buy-in to understand the business case for making a change, and that might potentially be beneficial. I mean, it can be a long process. Network engineers are, they're vital aspects of any enterprise IT operations. So getting their buy-in, or at least openness to start working with that and looking at new platforms or whatnot, I think is important. At the end of the day, they're not the ones that are signing the checks for a lot of the hardware, and they may not necessarily always be on board or the ones holding the bag for any risk management. So I think it has to be in collaboration with upper management, generally getting that support. Rich, anything to add?
Yeah, I've seen the similar things, like when everybody was switching from Novell to Windows NT, and when everybody was switching from WordPerfect to Word and those kind of things, where you had the people, the diehards, who were stuck. And there are a lot of people who are very fond of the F5s. But in my experience, if we can give them a chance to get a look at the NetScaler and try it out, see the feature capability and how easy it is to work with, we can win them over pretty good.
Try a pilot. I mean, especially if you're entitled to the new licensing, what do you have to lose other than time? You got the ability to pilot it, drive a new use case with it, get some familiarity with little to no risk involved, both financially and as far as availability of your applications or whatnot, to just really kick the tires. And that should help prove it out and at least start to develop some buy-in and help the business case, while providing a path forward to and establishing trust on that platform in the environment.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think that with the new licensing that Citrix is offering, where you're essentially getting unlimited amount of incidences of NetScaler, however you want to deploy, you're really saving a lot not to renew the F5 hardware, and you can accomplish the same thing, if not more, right? So it's almost like, if you want to use an analogy, that it may be different driving a gas car or to an electric car. The driving in an electric car may be a little different, but you get used to it. And just on the sheer amount of money that you will actually be able to save not filling up gas over time, it's a tremendous amount of saving that you cannot afford not to look at. So so in the case where we do have a significant amount of saving in front of you by using this new platform to deploy as many NetScalers as you can to accomplish your job. I mean, it's worthwhile to do the exercises, and ultimately the network engineers, be it that you take care of the F5 or you take care of the NetScaler, you're still going to take care of those critical business and networking functions. Just going to be a different machinery that you're going to be actually operating, right?
Yeah, I'd really focus on the ease of management. I mean, there is a lot of unique benefits to NetScaler that we've covered, but just the streamlined management and the central management of NetScalers across the portfolio, cloud, on-prem, different types, virtual, physical, whatever, that in of itself can be a game changer. It's just like, hey, listen, like I resisted using Uber and ride sharing services for years just because calling taxis was what I knew. And by the time I eventually actually said fine it and switched, within a month I was going, wow, like, I mean, no offense to the taxi industry, but it was a revamped way of doing things. In many, many ways, NetScaler represents a revamping of doing a lot of ADC load balancing and other security functions for web apps and whatnot. So it's actually doing it and just giving it a chance and really putting it through its paces finally can be the real eye opener at the end of the day.
And let's not forget that there are some capabilities of the NetScaler that aren't available on the F5. We mentioned briefly the intelligent traffic management, but that functionality it doesn't exist anywhere else. All right, and you could literally look at your traffic and say, okay, I'm noticing that these people from this section over here are getting a bad experience. What if I put a data center in this Azure or this AWS location here? What would that do? And it will tell you how much it will reduce the latency for those users. And like I said, you can drill down to a specific provider in a specific region of the country or the world, and find out what the latency is and where would it make sense to put the resources in.
Yep, absolutely. So give it a chance. That's what I say.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all of our questions that we have. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out. You can email us or connect with us on social media and make sure that we can get you those answers. So thank you so much, Richard and Michael. You did a great job. Awesome.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Appreciate spending time with us. Take care.
Appreciate it.
Thank you again, everyone. It was great to have you here today.
Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.
Thank you, guys.